In the 2nd century, a Roman emperor spends his nights writing to no one, not to the Senate, not to his generals, not even to his family. He writes to himself in Greek, in a private notebook never meant for publication. Historians will later call it Meditations. His name is Marcus Aurelius, and the book that emerges from those nights becomes one of the most quietly devastating pieces of writing in human history, because it is not philosophy performed for an audience. It is a man arguing with his own mind in real time, trying to survive being human. Centuries later, that private argument still works. Here are 7 of its sharpest lessons, what each one means, and a simple example of where it applies today. The first lesson concerns control. Marcus divides the entire world into 2 categories, and only 2. Things within a person's power and things outside it. Thoughts, judgments, desires, reactions. Those belong to the first category. Other people's opinions, the weather, illness, death, the actions of enemies, those belong to the second. Nearly all human suffering, in his account, comes from confusing the 2. Consider an employee waiting on a promotion decision made entirely by someone else's committee. The outcome is outside their control. How they prepare, how they perform, how they respond to whatever answer arrives, all of that stays inside their control. Energy spent worrying about the committee's private discussion is energy spent on a category that was never available to influence. The second lesson concerns obstacles. Marcus writes a line, later repeated by strategists and coaches who often don't know its source. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Consider a small business that loses its main supplier overnight. The obstacle looks like a disaster in the moment, but the search for a new supplier sometimes uncovers a cheaper, faster, more reliable one, something that would never have been found without the original setback forcing the search. The blockage becomes the reason for the improvement, not just an interruption to it. The third lesson concerns mortality, and Marcus returns to it constantly, almost obsessively. He reminds himself he could leave life right now, not to feel morbid, but to use death as a filter for what actually matters. Consider a disagreement with a sibling over something said a decade ago, still unresolved, still occasionally reheated at family gatherings. Framed against the plain fact that neither person's time is guaranteed, the old grievance often shrinks fast. The filter doesn't erase the disagreement. It just makes clear whether it was ever worth the years spent carrying it. The fourth lesson concerns other people's behavior, and here Marcus sounds almost eerily modern. He writes that each morning he should expect to meet people who are jealous, ungrateful, arrogant, or deceitful, not as complaint, but as preparation. Consider someone starting a new job, expecting one difficult coworker before they've even met the team. When that difficult coworker inevitably appears, there is no shock, no derailment, just the situation unfolding exactly as anticipated. The expectation absorbs the impact in advance. The fifth lesson concerns the present moment, treated not as a mindfulness slogan, but as a plain fact. Marcus points out that no one loses any life but the one they are living right now, and no one lives any life but the one they are losing right now. Consider a student who spends an entire study session replaying yesterday's bad exam and dreading next week's harder one. Almost none of that mental energy touches the actual material in front of them right now, the only material that can actually be learned in that hour. The past exam is finished. The future exam hasn't arrived. Only the current page is real. The sixth lesson concerns judgment. and it may be the most quietly powerful idea in the entire book. Marcus writes that a thing does not have the power to create an opinion about itself. An event is neutral until the mind assigns it meaning, and that assignment can be revised. Consider two people stuck in the same delayed flight. One treats it as a personal insult from the universe and spends 3 hours furious. The other treats it as unplanned time and reads half a book. The delay was identical for both. The suffering was entirely manufactured by the judgment laid on top of it, not by the event itself. The seventh lesson concerns the wider structure everything sits inside. Marcus reminds himself repeatedly that he is part of something larger, a whole made of interconnected parts, the way a limb is part of a body. Acting purely for private advantage, cut off from that larger structure, is described as a kind of self-amputation. Consider a manager who hoards credit for a project the whole team built together. In the short term, it might look like an advantage. Over time, the team stops volunteering ideas, stops covering for each other, stops trusting the manager with anything real. The hand that fights the rest of the body has misunderstood what it actually is, and eventually pays for the misunderstanding. 7 lessons written by one man, alone, at night, with no intention that any of it survive him. Control what can be controlled. Let the obstacle become the path. Use mortality as a filter. Expect friction. Live in the only interval that exists. Separate the event from the judgment. Remember the larger structure everything belongs to. None of it was written as advice. It was written as an argument with a single difficult mind, trying to hold itself together, one night at a time, in a palace that could not do that work for him. That is likely the reason it still holds together for anyone reading it now, centuries and empires later, in circumstances he could never have pictured. He was not writing a book. He was writing a way to survive being himself. The book was just what happened to be left behind.